Hi, this is Starkey Sowers. Welcome again to another Plus Program training series. Today's topic is protein. So just think of that word protein, and the word protein kind of perks everybody up and kind of has a resonance to it. And rightfully so, protein or the word protein actually means premier importance or the most important. So when we look at proteins chemically, what we know is this, is they're made of carbons, hydrogens, oxygens, and nitrogen. Different than any of the other macronutrients such as carbohydrates and fats, proteins have nitrogen. It's the only source of nitrogen that our body can actually absorb or get nitrogen into it. And nitrogen is actually important, believe it or not. So when we look at proteins, we know a couple different things. Number one, when we look at the body composition, about 60% of the body is water, 20% of the body is protein, and then the remaining percentage is going to be in fats and some minerals as well as maybe some vitamins as well. All right, so ultimately, when we think of proteins, we have to remember a couple of things. Proteins are structural. So one thing I like to do is almost kind of draw this analogy between a house and proteins in your body. So when we look at the chart here, we actually see that proteins ultimately make up what we call bone tissue, muscle tissue, hair, skin, nails, as well as tendons and ligaments, which kind of holds everything together, and also the organ tissue. All those tissues are protein tissues, all right, are made of protein components. So they're the structure of your house, and your house being almost like an analogy to your house that you live in. 2x4s would be the bones, and the skin around it, so to speak, would be the stucco. The inside is the muscle, and that's, of course, you moving around. So ultimately, proteins become a component of each and every one of those particular factors. All right, so one thing to remember about proteins is this. Proteins need to be replaced on a daily basis. So every single day, your body's in a situation where it's replacing components. In fact, there's 40,000 different types of protein components that the body has to make each and every day. One quick illustration is this. The body actually makes roughly about a half a pound to a pound of muscle, new muscle, every single day. So ultimately, the body's in a constant state of repair. So a quick analogy is, let's say you have a car, you put gas in it every day, you fuel it up, you send it down the road, and you drive it around. And then ultimately what happens is you eventually have to take it to the shop. When you take it to the shop, they're starting to replace parts and pieces because they're worn out. Well, that's what your body does on a regular basis with protein and structural components. They have to be replaced on a daily basis. Remember that bone tissue is actually living tissue. It's moving, it's living, it's being replaced all the time. All right. So with that said, one thing that you might be thinking is, well, how much protein do I need? Do I need a lot of protein, or how much protein is needed? Well, roughly about 60 grams of protein is needed a day. And when we get to part 2 on this, we'll actually show you what that looks like. So don't go too far away, and make sure you watch part 2. So anyways, going with that, 60 grams a day becomes essential probably for most males and females, especially in a sedentary environment. Well, what about somebody that's working out? Somebody that's working out is going to need 80 grams to plus maybe 100 grams a day. So another unique situation is this. As we age, we start to lose muscle tissue. In fact, by the age of 65, 27 to 30% of the muscle tissue that you had when you're 18 is gone. So we know that there's a need for protein for seniors. Believe it or not, seniors have an increased need for protein. So here we go, an increased need, roughly about 80 grams a day as well. So that actually increases as you get older. So it's a little bit different than what you would thought, that you actually would decrease. So ultimately, it actually increases. So having that particular protein helps the body to repair and make it much more effective and much more able to withstand aging process. All right. So you might be thinking, okay, so I know I need protein. I know I need 60 grams a day. I know they're for structural components. I know that 20% of my body is made of proteins, and I've got to have it coming in on a regular basis. But one of the things that you might be thinking about is this. Well, where in the world do I get proteins? Well, believe it or not, you might already be getting proteins, whether you know it or not. And undoubtedly, that's true. So let's look at the list real quick. So looking at the list, we see a couple different things. First of all, there's vegetable sources of proteins as well as animal sources. So the animal sources are typically going to be meats, as well as chicken and fish, as well as dairy and egg products. So you might think, well, what about cottage cheese? Well, that's definitely a dairy product. So that's got protein in it. You might be thinking, well, what about, for instance, like a glass of milk? Absolutely. Eggs, no question. Egg whites, yes. Egg yolks, yes. All of it's got protein. So protein there for sure. So a lot of you guys might be thinking, well, you know what? I'm a vegetarian, or I like leaning a little bit more towards a vegetarian style of eating. So how would I make sure that I'm getting adequate protein there? So real quick, looking at the list again, we see a couple significant things. So legumes become top of the list, or beans and legumes a little bit interchangeably here. So think of a couple different things. Think of soybeans, think of all the different types of soy products such as tofu, seitan, things of that nature. Other things like lima beans, green beans, all those things have great components of proteins. All right, so in addition, grains as well, rice, wheat, buckwheat, quinoa, amaranth, all those particular grains having great sources of proteins as well. Additionally, nuts and seeds. In fact, there's an explosion of nuts and seeds when it comes to like chia, hemp, as well as flax seeds, great sources of protein as well. And finally, there are some vegetables that have great amounts of proteins as well. And a great thought on that would be broccoli, probably being the top of the food chain, so to speak, for protein out of vegetable source. All right, so that kind of wraps it up, gives you an idea what protein foods are, why your body needs it. We definitely want to maintain the house, and then also give you a little bit more of a respect for the word protein. And don't forget, on the next segment, we got a little bit more for you about proteins. I definitely recommend watching it. This is Starkey Sowers. Thank you for watching another Plus Program training series.